Hi, very good evening to you all. Welcome to Chatham House. It's wonderful to see so many people here tonight. I was just saying to Kevin, suddenly realised that, these guys report on the world. I suddenly realised that there's the people that are supposed to be running it are in here tonight, or want to run the world anyway. And I think you're right to be here because how the world gets run, I think, depends quite a bit on the kind of news media that's out there to inform people. And as we've seen increasingly, news media becoming part of the story in quite horrible ways, as we saw in France, but very interesting ways generally, I think. So tonight we're going to see how that news industry has changed. Some practical notes. I like this, it's Chatham House, but this isn't Chatham House rules. This is very much on the record. You're very welcome to comment on proceedings anywhere you like, really, obviously. But if you're going to comment on Twitter, the hashtag is #CHEvents. Please stick your mobiles on silent and be aware that there's going to be a reception afterwards. What is the future of news? For me, I should explain that I'm a former journalist. I used to work at places like the BBC and Channel 4 News. I am now a professor at the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE. I also run a think tank, a journalism think tank at the LSE called Polis. That has a big annual conference on March the 27th, which you're all invited to come to. So for me, the future of news, it's a business model, basically, talking about it at least. But these guys do it. On my left, Kevin Sutcliffe really is one of the most influential and incredibly prolific producers of TV current affairs over the last time, over the last period. He's either been making or commissioning some really fantastic, hard-hitting documentaries, domestic stuff, international stuff at the BBC and Channel 4, but he is now head of programming for Vice in Europe, and again, producing some amazing, high-profile films. In the middle, Jim Waterson, typical young journalist, ex-Oxford, ex-City AM, now at BuzzFeed, where he writes stuff like, and he's going to hate me for quoting this kind of stuff, where he writes stuff like, quote, 21 pictures of politicians in wellies staring at floods. You're all probably familiar with BuzzFeed. If you're not, you really need to get familiar with it. It's hiring, alongside Jim, some of the finest young journalists in Britain today, and you really should prepare yourself for a Media Guardian headline along the lines of, it's going to be a BuzzFeed election. At the end, finally, Sarah Marshall. She works for a bastion, if you like, of old media, which is Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal. Though she really is a true digital native. Before the Wall Street Journal, she worked at journalism.co.uk, and so is a real expert on how journalism is made in the digital era, as well as making it herself. And again, if you think you know the Wall Street Journal, go and have a look at it again. It's in the process of an incredible transformation as it goes online and it goes into social networks. So the idea tonight, these three are going to explain what they do and what they think is different, and perhaps try and project into the future. And then it'll be your chance to ask questions, so please get your questions ready for when they've finished. And I'm going to kick off. Kevin Sutcliffe, Vice News.
Vice News launched in March last year. It's the fastest growing news channel on YouTube. We've had with 1.23 million subscribers and 160 million video views since we launched. In the last couple of months, we've been putting out things like Islamic State documentary. We have dispatches from Ukraine, Syria. We have a form of journalism that is immersive, raw, embedded, and authentic. And we're still finding our way. We're still trying to work out if that way of reporting is fresh, new, and trying to work our way forward through that. About a year ago, I was asked by Shane Smith, who runs Vice Media, to come along and help launch what turned out to be Vice News. It came out of a notion, and it was a notion that was very familiar to me from being in television, was that television news, current affairs, and often documentary attract an older audience. And the sort of logic in editorial meetings I went to at Channel 4 and the BBC was that's because young people, millennials, 16 to 35, aren't interested in the world. They are too busy playing computer games, or that their interest will last about 3 minutes. Vice had started to put out documentaries about very real things, Mali, a coup in Mali, Egypt, the way that Egypt, the Arab Spring, was unfolding. These documentaries were incredibly popular. They were long, their engagement times of 20 to 30 minutes, and they were getting hundreds of thousands of video views. So Vice decided that actually people are wrong. There's a great interest in that age group in the world. It's just that how it was being presented was the issue. And if you look across most television at the moment, you'll see formatting that's out of date. It's run its course. It talks down to people. It is not representative of 16 to 35-year-olds. They don't come to television news particularly. It skews very old, and that's because it doesn't speak to them. And so with that sort of in the back of our minds, we sort of tried to start to make what we think is a different form of television news and documentary. And so what does that look like? It looks like Ambushed in South Sudan, a film where two of our journalists go on a journey with the South Sudanese army to take a town. And it's a 25-minute film in which you experience this army trying to take a town and then retreating under fire. And it's an experiential documentary where you learn more about Africa, African wars, those people. It's very up close, it's very personal. And that's a hallmark of Vice News' journalism, that you're in the mix with the story, with the journalist, with the people you're meeting. It's character-driven and it's immersive. And that seems to have touched a nerve and certainly attracted large audiences to the work we do. So we started in March with that film. Since then, we've embedded with the Islamic State, which for Vice News was a big moment. It was a global moment in terms of media, because we remain the only media organisation to have got inside and been able to film with the Islamic State and got out. And that, again, showed how we operate, which, again, is a very raw and unmediated way. If you think about how you see television, it's very marked in the States, but it's also very marked here. If you see the reporters and the way that reporting across the BBC, even to some extent Channel 4 and ITN, it's very uniform. You've got journalists talking to journalists, often in studios, standing in front of the story. They're never in the story. Very occasionally you'll see that they do get involved, but it feels like a very old-fashioned model. And why I think that is because people now want authenticity. News now does not break in a newsroom. It does not break at 10 o'clock with Fiona Bruce telling you the headlines. News breaks on Twitter. Somebody's always nearer the story than you, and somebody's always got a more authentic take on the story. And Vice News acknowledges that. And I think what we do is try to get to the authentic part of the story every time. Also, we're very honest and open about, and I think quite democratic about, journalism and how journalism now works. So it's not a priesthood. It's not a specialism. What it is about people telling extraordinary stories in extraordinary places that are trusted. And we show you how we go about that. We're very open about that. We're not trying to own things in the way that media organisations traditionally have. We don't package in the same way. We're online, which gives us different advantages. You know, we can put things out at any length. If you're bored with it, we can cut it down to 5 minutes. If it's really good, it can run it to an hour. The audience will still be there for it. They will share it. They're watching a lot of it on mobile, or on portable screens. They're not waiting for the news to come on television. So these are the things we're learning as well. Over 30% of our, I think, our content is now watched on mobile. It's shared. It's shared. Longer films are shared, which is again an interesting thing. Not short blips. We'll no doubt talk about the differences between BuzzFeed and Vice. We are about original content, and that's quite an old-fashioned concept. We send people out to go find out about the world, and we show them finding out about the world. And I think that's, again, something that maybe is sort of disrupted, if you want, the way that television news is now being seen, that it's seen as too controlling and it's too managed. And we've tried to show you. And I think our audience, and what we picked up from our audience, was that they sniff inauthenticity, lack of authenticity. They sniff that, and that's why they were not coming to television news. If you see American television news, it's like British television news on steroids. It's extraordinary. The people sitting around talking, and playing in a bit of footage, but talking to each other. And the real world is never let in. And I'm hoping that if you go to Vice News site today, you'll see a range of stories from reporters who are in the age group of the people who are consuming. So they're 25, 26, 27. They're in Hong Kong. They're in Syria. Today we're putting up somebody's in eastern Ukraine. So you'll see that the journalists also are speaking to the audience in a much closer, more intimate way. And I think the things that are happening now with journalism that are interesting, and what particularly working in the net helps, is this closeness. You're very close to the story. People are very close to the journalism that's going on. And I think that's what we've learned, I think, over the last year, that very quickly people engage with you, and they own what you're doing very quickly as well. That's really interesting. So the barriers between journalism that's presented and journalism that's experienced and journalism that's consumed is absolutely collapsing. So I find those things very interesting for us.
Quick follow-up question. Thinking of the future, you're talking about this fantastic opportunity that you've had, partly because of the internet and this ability to do things differently. Where do you think Vice goes? Does it stick with this kind of incredible sort of specialist attention to these incredibly impactful stories in a few places? Or have you got your sights on the BBC? Would you like to be more of a kind of comprehensive news service? Because in a way, you're a series of brilliant films, aren't you? Rather than so you don't pretend to be you're going to cover the world. Or which way do you head it?
Well, I think Shane Smith, the Vice founder, said we are the CNN of the streets, which is a nice image, and that's more aimed at the way we report off the street and being being in and out of the story. I don't think we are a collection of a series of sort of noticeable films. We offer an editorial range as well. We're posting a lot of editorial every day from around the world, from our writers, and a range of video. If you actually look across the output for the 9 months, there's an incredible range. We're not competing with a BBC or one of the sort of cable things. We're not, because we don't need to fill. They fill for hours. If you think about actually the amount of content they're putting out that's original as opposed to what's going in between. Yeah. Well, actually, we don't need to do that. So what we've got is an online and YouTube presence, which gives you an immense amount of selection of things that we have things to say about. They are on the news agenda. We've got 88 dispatches about Ukraine and 3 or 4 huge documentaries within 9 months. We commit to things. Syria is another thing, Islamic State. We commit to what we think are big stories that we've got things to say about. But underneath that, we've got every day we are posting what we think is interesting in terms of what you might say the news agenda. But actually we set our own agenda and we look to create our own path.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, the BuzzFeed story.
Yeah, I think we were talking before we came up here about how Vice and BuzzFeed often get lumped together as internet sites what are doing news, and people seem to think that, you know, somehow because we're on the internet, we've miraculously cracked everything and we've created a whole new way of reporting. And I think, aside from what you've heard there, and what I want you to take away tonight is that both of them, the only thing in common is a belief that unless you actually invest in paying journalists to go out and do actual reporting, no one's going to read you. Endless rewrites won't do well online, and just sort of spewing out the same old stuff, there's no reason you click on us rather than on the BBC or the Guardian site. So I'm just going to quickly run through how we sort of, our business model works, what we're trying to do in terms of shifting from endless lists and into hard news, and then sort of where we're going to go from there. So BuzzFeed was started in 2006, just a site to basically capture what's going on the web, i.e. whatever is trending. Before Twitter, before Facebook took off, just what are people on the web talking about? Let's just grab it and put it on the site. And so it got very, very good at working out what people were talking about. And then in about 2010, it had a lot of readers. It was known for sort of, you know, just for daft lists, just for sort of funny pictures. And then they hired a guy called Ben Smith, who is the most insidery political journalist that DC had. And everyone thought this was mad. This is, you know, it's the equivalent of Heat hiring, you know, Michael Crick or something like that. It's completely mad. And what he went about was, I'm going to make sort of a strange modern online tabloid that's going to have fun, light, daft stuff, and it's also going to have hard-hitting news. And the trick is, try and avoid the middle ground between the two. So we, in the UK, launched about 18 months ago, and I joined when there was about 10 of us. Now there's about 40 or 50 of us, and we're looking to hire another 30 or 40 within the next year. So we're aiming to be at about 80 journalists in the about that by the end of the year, hopefully. So our entire business model is made, how can we get people to share things? So what can we do to provoke you to get to the end of an article and think that was either brilliant, hilarious, shocking, disgusting, to the extent that you are then going to say, everyone on my Facebook must see this. Everyone on Twitter must read this immediately. I am either appalled, amused, or something like that from reading this piece. And that is how, when we get a hit, when we get a story that really goes around, then it really goes viral. It gets insane traffic. And when it doesn't take off, then it bombs. There's not much in the middle. So we start off, and you probably mainly know us still for, you know, 21 things you only know if you go to Chatham House lectures, which, you see, if we got that right, every single person in this room would probably stick that on their Facebook, and then all your friends would click on it. And then before you know it, actually, you've done the thing we're trying to do, which is we filled a niche there. So there might not be more than a few hundred of you in the room, but if you all put that on Facebook and then a few friends who are interested also share it, suddenly you've got 10 to 20,000 people who've read that piece. And that's then more than a lot of newspaper front pages when they're put on the internet get, even though they've supposedly got far broader appeal. I mean, there's some broadsheets, friends who work at national broadsheets, who their front page will go online and it's a big political story. And they're getting, you know, sort of 10, 20,000 people reading it, because it doesn't actually have mass appeal. It's just that that's what a news editor thinks is important. So the first thing is that we're all about targeting niches who will then share stuff like mad. And with that in mind, I'm building up politics coverage ahead of the election. And we're going to do either two sorts of stories. One, stories that only people, Westminster insiders, will care about. And the idea is, if you break a Westminster scoop, something about, you know, X-politician is considering a run for Y, you know, it's real insider stuff, but everyone in Westminster will want to read it. Maybe no one else outside it will, but within that bubble, suddenly that matters. Or the other one is, we break a story or run a fun thing that has mass appeal, and that gets 500,000 readers. What we don't want to be doing is that sort of classic political journalism thing of, Vince Cable has today indicated a minor shift to the left on some policy that you've never even heard of, which is what makes up a lot of what goes on the top of the 10 o'clock news and things like that, and which even I, as a total politics obsessive, find, if I'm honest with myself, a bit dull. So there's that. And then there's and so just to give you an idea, so while we are known for the sort of fun stuff, we're separating the company out as we grow into people who do this stuff, people who do fun videos, people who do hard news, our foreign reporting teams. We had one of the first reporters on the ground for the MH17 crash who did just some amazing reporting from there. But unlike Vice, we're not really going into video news because we're trying to get you, I imagine our typical reader being that person who's got 5 minutes, they're waiting around for a bus, they want to check out something, their mates put this thing on Twitter, have you seen this dispatch from, have you seen this shocking story, and you can read it in a couple of minutes, or you're maybe reading that amazing long form piece. But the idea is something that grabs your attention, but without without taking too long. And video for us, we don't really see that as where we're going to go with the news side of things. So we're hiring LGBT editors. We're hiring. We just hired someone to come cover young Muslim in Britain issues. Sort of the idea of what's it like to be a young Muslim in Britain, actually reporting within the community. We've also got Heidi Blake from the Sunday Times, who runs our Insight team, coming to run our investigations. But the idea is all of these things will create stuff that really, really appeals to a certain sector of people and prompts them to share it like mad. And it doesn't matter that it's not got universal appeal, because there'll be something else for the people who are turned off by that elsewhere on the site. So there's that. There's also the tone thing. We are known for us, I flip between the two. When there was the floods last year and I couldn't think of anything to write because the story was politicians look at water and there's nothing they can do about it, and everyone else is just reporting Cameron pledges more money for water, whatever, there's nothing there. So we just did a daft roundup of, Kim Jong-il looking at things, but instead it was British politicians just pointing at water and looking concerned. And so weirdly, that captured the futility of it all more than a straight news report. But if there was an exclusive news report that we'd had on it, we'd have run that instead. So, and the trick is to avoid falling down the middle and sort of imagining that people want 17 things that you didn't know about Ed Miliband's speech, because you either want to know Ed Miliband's speech or you want to be amused. You don't want something in the middle. And that sort of leads on to the final point I'll just make quickly, which is we have a young audience. We've got 20 million unique visitors a month, which is a dubious measure used by unique visitors. It's very boring to get into now, but it's a measure that's always a bit dubious, but it's the one that everyone uses. So that puts us sort of at a national newspaper group level, about Mirror Group. And we reckon we've got pretty good coverage among 20 to 35-year-olds. A lot of them are clicking on us a month in the UK. There's a lot of people who at least once a month are clicking on BuzzFeed in the UK, and we reckon we've pretty much got most people in their 20s going on us once a month. The issue with that is that the BBC, talking to them, they're often tempted to sort of dumb things down a bit and say, here's the news for young people. And the one thing we find is that people hate that. They might be clicking onto us because there's a hilarious list that they've seen on Facebook, but when they see the news in the right-hand column, if it's patronising, if it's dumbed down, they won't click on it and they won't share it. If it's clever and interesting and different, then they will. And so that's the thing. So we're obsessed with trying to get people to make and share stuff. We're investing in sort of niche reporting because weirdly we think that can make us reach a bigger audience, and just don't patronise people. That's how we see the future of news going.
Thanks very much, Jim. Sarah, slightly different perspective, obviously, with your, well, they've both got global reach as well, but you're actually, the top people are headquartered elsewhere. So
yes.
How are you, as Europe boss, how does it work?
I'm not quite Europe boss, I have
Well,
to
social media.
Yes.
Social media.
So, I work for the Wall Street Journal, which probably for, 110 years of its existence was probably, speaking to mainly people in New York, I think it's fair to say, rather than the US in general, of a certain sector. And now with digital, everything's changed and it's a very global audience. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about how social media has changed that in particular, and of course Kevin and Jim have alluded to the fact that yes, of course, every audiences are growing through people sharing things that they feel affinity with or whatever. So I think really social media does kind of four things for certainly us and most other people. So one is that it kind of drives traffic, and what's kind of interesting for a site like the Journal, which is probably it's a skewed male, or it's what you'd expect. It's a skewed male audience, it's a skewed older audience, it's a skewed affluent audience. But of course, social media brings a very global audience. It brings a very a much younger audience. So for example, people who share stuff from the Wall Street Journal tend to be much younger. So 26% of people who share stuff on Facebook, Wall Street Journal content on Facebook, are in that 18 to 24 age category, and 33% are in that 25 to 34 category. So it kind of helps us reach future readers, well, current readers, but future readers, and really kind of, take serious journalism out to new audiences. And it also kind of, the second thing social does, it kind of helps our brand get out there. So this we saw, a good example would be at the weekend, Obama's visit to India, where, we've got, like probably you've found that we've, both Vice and BuzzFeed, I imagine you've got quite big audiences in India. There's, 300 million affluent, middle-class, English-speaking Indians. And, suddenly, a story like that on Facebook will really kind of take off for us. And by the there was one post that we posted on Saturday or Sunday that it had got a reach on Facebook of 4.8 million people, and actually 4.2 million of those were new readers, so taking the Wall Street Journal's brand to kind of new places. And from one post we put on Facebook, it had 74,000 clicks, which that's quite a lot of traffic coming from new places and kind of potential new readers in the future. So social's very good about kind of introducing people. And of course, there's a big engagement thing. People, we've gone from being these kind of newspapers that get published overnight and you've moved on to the next story, but by then anyway, to places where we're in conversation with the audience and we're talking to people and listening to them and getting stories from them, and it's a two-way conversation now. And so we do a lot of, we realize that people really like to speak to our journalists, for example, or our experts. So, when oil prices go down, we will put a couple of our journalists up so people can ask them specific questions. And, they might be really kind of niche, wonky subjects that people that really engage with those niche communities, those core audiences to the Wall Street Journal. Because, of course, you probably know the Wall Street Journal for business news and finance news and probably world news, which are the things that it's really known for. But it's kind of, we do a lot of lifestyle and lots of other things as well. And then I guess one of the things that always excites me about social media is the potential for news gathering. So if you just think about the stories that have happened in 2015, that we've got the Charlie Hebdo stuff and the Paris hostage attacks, and then, the way Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner in Argentina is kind of responding to criticism about the prosecutor who did or didn't kill himself, and then the story of the death of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, who, interestingly, from a social media perspective, had died, I think, 3 times the previous week, because there was a lot of kind of, he'd been in hospital, of course, and there was some various people trying to kind of, put out news that he died, and I saw quite a prominent journalist had tweeted that because they hadn't checked that this was a brand new account that somebody had kind of set up and pretending to be a Saudi minister. So that kind of, Saudi Arabia, I think there's more Twitter users in Saudi Arabia per capita of online population than anywhere else in the world. So, of course, that's kind of an interesting story that plays out. And then, you've got kind of the Greek elections and acceptance speeches kind of going out on Twitter in real time. So I think from a news gathering perspective, just thinking about those things this year, it's amazing how we as the Wall Street Journal now news gather. There is always someone closer to the story. I sit next to somebody who is from an organisation called Storeful. Storeful started probably 4 or 5 years ago. It started out of Ireland, set up by a previous news anchor from RTE, I think he was at. And it essentially has built really good technology on top of social media. So they've got all sorts of bits of technology that every time certain keywords are mentioned within certain Twitter lists based on different countries, you will get an alert. And so therefore, they're really, really fast at getting breaking news from social media and getting pictures and being able to verify those pictures and being able to check. So being as we kind of sit together and work very closely together, actually that kind of news gathering aspect in the way that social media has changed journalism is really, you know, we're able to report from Raqqa without ever going to Raqqa, the ISIS stronghold, because we are able to get this kind of, what is that horrible term that you might have heard of, user-generated content, of people kind of uploading footage filmed on a mobile phone that then we along with Storif will check, and then we're able to report in kind of a really new and, well, not that new anymore, but a really kind of different way. And so that's how I think it's certainly changed the way a very traditional organisation like the Wall Street Journal breaks news.
Follow-up question. As you say, it was a very traditional organisation with an incredibly distinctive clientele or readership. How have they reacted? You talked about the new clientele, you're digging out people in India, etc. But what about that core audience? Are they now all buzzing with your groovy Twitter stuff, or are they writing you hate mail, you know?
They're not writing us hate mail, certainly. I mean, I think they always, you know, I often think that social media is really about getting new audiences, etc., and younger audiences, but that's actually complete rubbish. You know, we quite often do, you know, Facebook Q&As or whatever, and you will find that we did something, you know, on before the Greek election about, you know, what happens if there's what one of our columnists had written about this, called an accidental Grexit, from an exit from the Eurozone by Greece. And, you know, you basically open up a columnist or a commentator, Simon Nixon, and put him on Facebook, and essentially our core audience, those kind of, you know, like I say, slightly older, you know, will come on and actually ask really detailed questions about really, you know, in a way that surprised me when I joined. And the first one that we did, one of the first ones we did, was on, you know, just ahead of the Scottish referendum. And I thought, you know, does our global audience care? They found out everything they need to know about the Scottish referendum. Is the Facebook audience really just going to ask about, you know, what's going to happen to the flag? But no, you know, they were asking really smart questions, and you know, it led to much kind of, you know, much richer experience all round, I think. So I think it's not. I mean, obviously not everybody's interacting in that way, but it's been very pleasantly surprising how much of our kind of core, paying, traditional, older, affluent audience actually wants to do this stuff and talk to journalists in this way.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Sarah. So you've heard from these three. You know, you've heard how they're making journalism, how making journalism is different, how the content is in some ways at least very different, and also how they think about the audience differently, I think, from how we thought about it in the past. I'd like to know what you lot think and whether you'd like to ask them any questions. So what I need you to do is to put your hands up, wait for a microphone. There's a gentleman at the back who we're going to kick off with. Get in there. Well done. Hiya. Say who you are.
Hi there, my name's Rory Cannan. I work at Chatham House. Thanks for really interesting presentations. I wonder if anyone would like to comment on some of the more, the less positive aspects of the way the news is changing. Three examples in particular, that there's now such an incentive to be so fast and responsive. You know, have to tweet this out before anyone else, and how that leads to things like reports that ISIS were practicing FGM when it turned out to actually be baseless. It seemed quite plausible, but there was no real evidence behind it. And also the way that lies and deceit quite deliberately put out by certain groups can actually spread quite quickly. So those of you who look at Facebook quite regularly, I see every now and then people who I don't quite like that much anymore putting things like, it's a disgrace that an illegal immigrant gets £30,000 a year in benefits while a war pensioner is thrown out of a bus, kind of stupid, clear lies, but someone's copied and pasted the text. And the third one, which I don't know how, if there's a good phrase for this, but I call it maybe the clickbaitization of news. The fact that, as you say, sorry, the guy from BuzzFeed, you really want everyone to share this, and that's kind of the filter you're putting everything through. You want this to get shared, viral. So even what I do, and I've seen it in other organizations, there's always, well, how do we make this a bit more shareable and social media friendly? And it's kind of changing the lens of news in a way which I think at times can be a bit damaging. You know, you're trying to make it funny or shocking or somehow something that someone will just want to put on social media, where, I mean, that flood story you mentioned, yeah, it's pretty dull. It's the story of a fairly inert bureaucracy, slightly underfunded, and people suffering a little bit. You know, they weren't starving, dying, but it was kind of a dull story. But instead we're going to watch 10 cats that look like Ed Miliband or something. So just those three negatives. I'm not trying to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but I thought it'd be good to add that to the conversation.
I can't remember what the third was. It was verification, trivialization, and sort of same thing. Yeah. Okay. Sarah, do you want to kick off? Well, I don't do all of it, but verification is very much
verification.
That's very much your bag.
I mean, I mentioned the kind of Saudi king example, and I won't mention which news organisation or who it was who shared this. I was kind of surprised though, because I always think that I always say to journalists at the Journal, if your phone suddenly rings and says, I'm a Saudi minister and the king of Saudi Arabia has died, you don't just kind of immediately then publish that story. You have the same levels of going through, checking that an account's not been hacked and therefore some news has been put out there. You kind of go through all these different levels, and it's very old-fashioned journalism in a way, and there was a picture shared today of it was of northern Israel. It was the Hezbollah attack. And I saw that, somebody had put it out, and actually, it was clearly, they were only 3 clicks away from telling that photo was actually a photo that had been shared previously. You can kind of quickly scan the web to see if that photo has been shared before. You could easily do a check against what the weather had been like that day. Does it marry up? You can look at the EXIF data from a photo. So there's, it's not complicated stuff. It's not difficult stuff. Ask probably, younger journalists or journalists who are just kind of understand their way around kind of searching the internet, and you will find that it's not difficult to check and report. So I don't think journalism has changed in terms of the way people have always verified stuff, but there is there is a lot of stuff that's put out by journalism organisations by news organisations that just haven't properly checked stuff and haven't done their job properly.
But especially at speed as well, because there's that element. Has there been a shift where it's now okay to say this stuff is breaking? We don't honestly know exactly what's going on, but we're going to start telling you about it, as long as we make caveats. Do you think that changes things? Would you do that?
The Journal wouldn't do that. The Journal is very, very traditional. Traditional could be seen as a negative. The Journal is very, very careful about double-checking everything, and it would rather be absolutely accurate and never get egg on its face than make a mistake. It will be behind the Sky Newses and the CNNs and etc. On a lot of stories, because it just doesn't want to be kind of flagged up as jumping in too fast for the sake of actually only trying to beat your competitors in getting a story out.
Yeah, Jim. More on the clickbait.
Yeah, well, we get this a lot, and I can completely understand the case for the prosecution. No,
is it a prosecution? I mean, what's wrong? I mean, you're going to get traffic. Great.
Clickbait is the insult that you chuck around when you don't like something online. What our argument would be two things. We unashamedly want you to click on our articles. We do not want to put an American-style headline of at Chatham House, a journalist talks. It's just really dull. That's how the New York Times writes headlines. Equally, if we put at Chatham House hilarious footage of journalists doing a hilarious thing on our front page right now, hilarious footage, whatever, we could get millions of people clicking on it, and they'd all be desperately disappointed when they found out it was just a video of us 3 talking.
That's right.
So, so the clickbait we view as clickbait is when you fail to deliver on the headline. If you put something is hilarious and it's really not that funny, then people will be disappointed, not click again, and they certainly won't say this is brilliant enough to share it on Facebook. So our measure in terms of we are desperate to make you click, we're desperate to make you share it, but we measure it on social media stuff because we could put any old over-the-top headline on our homepage and people would click on it. However, if they're disappointed, then they won't share it. So we use that as the measure. If people are sharing it, it means they liked it in some form. So we want you to click it, and we will do everything we can to make you click it. We do not want you to then be disappointed, and that's where we see clickbait as being, when you just have that over-the-top headline and then a totally rubbish piece you get on.
Well, that ghastly thing where it's click on this, it's the most amazing thing you're ever going to see in your life.
Yeah.
and it never is. Kevin.
I think people are confusing the world of the internet and all its wonderful madness and news organisations. So basically, a news organisation, Vice, is no different than anybody else. You've got to trust us. So you've got to trust that we get it right. Getting it wrong is extraordinarily damaging. So it's very old-fashioned. That's one of the basis of journalism. So you trust us to tell you stuff, you trust us to bring you new stuff, and you trust us that it's right and that a week later or you don't see a small thing pop up going, well, actually, it wasn't really, the head of ISIS speaking. It was a man in Birmingham with a balaclava on. So that's absolutely key. There was mention of Storyful. Everybody accesses Storyful. And, the world is absolutely full of material appearing day in, day out that looks amazing and enticing. The most obvious one recently was the pictures of a plane allegedly shooting down the Ukrainian airliner. It was if you looked at it, it looked like a really good satellite picture of a plane firing rockets and all the rest of it. Clearly it had been doctored, nothing appears like that. But, the story there is who placed it, who disseminated it. That's a story. But also the other trick is, well, don't publish it until you're sure what you've got. So clearly that's just the old-fashioned way of doing it. We're different. We don't, in a way, get accused of clickbait. We're about original content and that content being shared on all screens and all different platforms. We're sort of platform agnostic. That's why we're on YouTube. That's why we want people to share our things, because they think the content, the story is fresh, new, challenging. That's what's important for us. It's a different way of attracting the same thing. Please click, please share. But actually, the product's a different sort of product. It's a video-heavy product.
Great questions. Anyone else? Down the front. Sorry, you have to run down the front here.
Thank you. I'm Caroline from KCL. And I'm interested in the relationship between the media and terrorism in the way that it might be a way of delivering the political message of certain groups. And you mentioned in particular how Vice had been able to go in and to report on IS. And I was wondering if there's anything particular, or what is rather particular about Vice that enabled this to happen, and also how the changing face of the news might change this relationship.
Great question. Kevin.
We'd been making films in Syria for a few months, and we'd been inside Syria to meet a group called Al-Nusra, a very unpleasant and hardline Islamist group, and we'd filmed with some British fighters. So we'd sort of made some connections, journalistic connections, and we were able to build on those journalistic connections in a very old-fashioned way to reach out to see if it was possible to film in Raqqa. At that time, and this was prior to what you're seeing now, the theatre of the beheadings and the posting, at that time IS, or ISIS as it was known then, was a smaller group fighting with other Islamist groups as well as fighting the regime. So it's a very different landscape. And so the opportunity arose for us to plan and satisfy ourselves that we could work as journalists there and in other parts of ISIS-controlled territory safely and get back out. And that's day in, day out journalism. We're doing that in lots of different places around the world. It just so happens that what happened to that film is it was in preparation when things changed, when they declared the caliphate, when the Americans responded, and it became a journalistic hot property. And so then it became itself a story, and it ran for, well, it's still running in a way, but it ran certainly for August as the story in itself was that we got this story. And there was criticism either way. Should you go and film this stuff? Are you working in cahoots with IS? Well, patently not. Anybody who watches that film will see that it's an extraordinary chilling insight into a very hardline terror group, how they think and what they do. And also it's worth mentioning that they don't need us. They've got a very sophisticated online presence into the bedrooms of everybody in the world who wants to be interested in their stuff. Way more hardcore and less unmediated than what we did. We did a piece of documentary journalism about what we found. What they're doing, which is extraordinary, is reaching out into I don't know, Birmingham bedrooms. You know, they've got a very sophisticated, equally sophisticated social media policy as we have. You know, they are very adept at that, and they're learning as well. And I think it's a sort of slightly odd argument to sort of blame the messenger for something like that, when in fact, you know, that we got in and out, and we're the only people so far. It's a happenstance, you know. Things changed, but you know, I don't know why they won't let anybody in and out. Now, they seem to have let a German in at some point, but it all seemed to be a bit odd. And he came back out at Christmas, and it was not really a big story. But they, you know, they don't need us. I mean, that's what's proved now, I think. They, you know, Storyful, everybody else is picking up their stuff, and it's being run within other contexts, within other pieces of journalism now, in a way. So we benefited from being at the right place at the right time with that story. I don't think there's any collaboration or collusion, and I think it is our duty to try and understand and meet and find out why groups like that do what they do. That's really important. It's also, in this current sort of age, for journalists are now targets, so it's incredibly hard now to work like that. So when you see anybody's work inside Syria or any place, Libya, places like that, now from 10 years ago, it's an extraordinarily different landscape, and it's extraordinarily dangerous, and it's extraordinarily hard to get at stories.
I'll just make a really quick comment, which is that in terms of sort of verifying stuff and on IS, is that we always now increasingly err on, it's daft for us to ignore the fact that everyone on Twitter is looking at something and we're not going to self-censor and not report it, because if all our readers are talking about it and discussing it, then we're in a weird position if we're not covering it in terms of images and things that are doing the rounds.
So what did you do with Hebdo? With the
we the moment that the Charlie Hebdo stuff, we republished everything and did not censor anything and published covers. There was no, because everyone else was publishing them on Twitter anyway.
The Journal?
Published.
Did you? The Times didn't, did it? No. Okay, interesting. Really interesting area. But let's take another question at the back, please.
Conor Quinn, Chatham House Communications. Jim, I'm thinking about what you were saying earlier about the BuzzFeed formula being the light and fluffy stuff and then the really hard, heavy-hitting stuff and ignoring that middle ground. I'm wondering if that's kind of a luxury of size, where you find that the bigger established organisations like BBC, they end up doing these boring reports about the floods even where they have nothing to say because they have to, because their viewers expect and demand them to have a story up there. And as these new media types grow, if they do continue to grow, are they going to find themselves in that same position where they have to cover stuff despite not having either the light and fluffy angle or the heavy, hard-hitting angle?
What I'd really like is to have an exclusive angle on the running story of the day. It's basically on the premise that at the moment, if there's a running political story and the BBC and the Guardian have the same take that we have, then what's the point of publishing our take? Because you're still going to go to the BBC, aren't you, for that? If we've got a different take, then you'll come to us. But it's just on the basis that on the internet, pretty much everyone's equal, and so whoever's got the freshest, newest, most different take will do better. And there's no point in having, I mean, I'm a member of the lobby, which is the sort of group that cover Parliament, and what you basically have there is 20 journalists writing the same stories for different publications in pretty much the same format with the same lines briefed out. And so it's quite hard to get away from that, but you get the rewards if you do.
Yeah. Do you agree with that sort of segmenting idea as well, Sarah? Because obviously the Wall Street Journal, as you said, is a financial specialist. You're broadening out a bit more. But do you accept that you are staying in that zone, or would you like to be more challenging the Guardian?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I often think, you know, with online, you're only really competing for people's time.
Right.
So, I think most news organisations will fully expect people to read widely, but being as we have kind of a mixed payment model, some stories are paid, some stories are free, and therefore in terms of serving subscribers and serving our core audience, we do try and cover everything rather than just kind of give it and retweet someone else's story so that we can move on and not cover it. So we will still try and cover everything that our core audience would want to know about.
Yeah, okay. Got loads. It's typical. Look, it's 5 minutes to go and you're all sticking your hands up. It's absolutely typical. Please, this lady here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Tracy Jane of Free A, I'm a Chatham House member. I'd just like to ask the panel generally about the role of any ethical code that they might adhere to. I'm particularly thinking in terms, and we touched on it earlier, in relation to the more graphic images, and whether or not you think, if you like, the boundaries in relation to that have become more liberal, and how you all deal with, pretty grim and grotesque images, particularly in the current vein of ISIS.
So particularly around taste, you mean? Or
Things that can cause offence, serious offence.
quickly, you guys?
Well, we absolutely believe that raw and authentic is important, and so we do use graphic images of war because that's important, and our audiences expect us to be authentic. We take very fine judgments on where the boundaries are depending on the material. We won't and haven't shown any of the beheadings, for example, the ISIS beheadings, so. Yes, we are not bound by Ofcom. We do that. We're not doing it gratuitously. We're doing it because it's a commitment to the sort of reporting that we are committed to, and that is to show you what war looks like for real, so that we are not the 3-minute package on the news that always looks the same about every war you've ever been to, because they can't actually show you anything. So we actually can show you, and we think you should see, and our audience wants to see. But we also take those judgments. I worked in television for a long time. The judgments are very similar, and we also run in the same way. The debates about what content is and what impact it has are the editorial debates I'm sure everybody does have.
Jim,
Yeah,
you're living?
pretty much the same. As long as the reader isn't surprised to see a graphic image, then that's fine. We have a lot of reveal buttons where we'll put an image behind something it'll say, this is a graphic image, click if you are okay seeing it. So basically, as long as the reader isn't surprised, then don't self-censor, but equally don't just show images for the sake of shocking people.
What about flesh? Are your standards about the same as the Mirror, that kind of thing?
That is not a question I've ever thought about, but I will come up with a policy and get back to you.
I'm partly thinking, well, actually, you don't make a lot of it. You're not a kind of look at her bum type.
No,
thing.
but if you want an honest answer, people feel guilty about reading celeb content like that and would never share it.
There you go, beautiful. Yeah. Sarah, codes.
So we have a standards and ethics committee. As a committee sounds terribly formal, but essentially we have a vetting, a couple of people in vetting that anything that we have that is kind of beyond the kind of realms of kind of normal reporting, anything that might be, questionable because it's showing a dead body or showing, something that you might, class as a graphic image, goes via our vetting and standards people. Every single tweet that we included in an embed within a story. So every time we use social media a lot within our reporting these days, and every time we use one of those eyewitness photos, for example, during the Charlie Hebdo attacks, that went via vetting because we wanted to make sure that we've got those standards, that we'd all had conversations about it, we checked it off, we were all comfortable with it, because obviously there's people sharing stuff that they're on scene, and these people are involved. And the Pakistan attacks, are these children the ones that you saw a minute ago? Are they now dead? So every photo is kind of goes through these processes. It happens amazingly quickly, but everything we have conversations about. And actually, I don't know whether I think I get the feeling sometimes it's a US-UK thing, and having worked at UK news organisations before, I think American news organisations, it is a little bit more like, yes, we can show you this stuff because this is newsworthy, this is part of the story. And we had some pretty graphic stuff coming out of Gaza that our reporter there had filmed, and yeah, we went with it.
Yeah. No, generally British TV is terribly safe, is the right word. Let's go over to that side. Perhaps should we go right to the corner there, the woman with the flowers on her.
Hi, I'm Olivia Crellin for the BBC. I've just come back from 18 months in the US, and I just wanted to remark that I don't think it's surprising that all three of the guests are working for US media. So I wondered if the first question I wanted to ask was about the changing face of news and whether you thought there was a difference between the UK and the US in terms of what innovation is going on. And the second question is more for BuzzFeed and Vice, and it's to do with the fact that there's a lot of startups that have happened in the US but have quickly kind of flopped. I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about, why you guys won't be a flash in the pan and whether you'll still be going, within another kind of 20 years. Thank you.
Reverse order. So Vice has been going for 20-odd years. It started as a magazine. It moved online seven years ago.
It's already middle-aged, isn't it?
It's already middle-aged, a bit like me. What the strength of Vice News is it's grown out of an online demand and presence. So we've already got a huge number of people who are coming to Vice online, and they told us what they wanted. They wanted Vice News. So that's why it's growing, because it's come organically out of what is the Vice News sort of family. So I think that's pretty straightforward. I think also, I'm not sure about the US sort of, whether that actually adds up to anything. We're a response to, Vice News is a response to what's been going on in the American media. In the sort of, there's a great American word, it's to bloviate, which is basically to sit around chatting all day long on news channels. They bloviate. And Vice News is absolutely a response to that. And I think it's fantastic that that's come out of, what was a magazine that started in Toronto in a very modest way in the mid-1990s. So if we go to that, to this, I think it's an amazing journey.
Jim?
In terms of whether it will be a flash in the pan, well, we'll have to check back in a few years' time to see how that one works out. But I think there's going to be a handful of places that will be really dominant online, and our strategy in Vice is, I think, to a certain extent, is grow like mad, hire like mad, and sort of blow the opposition out of the water while there's still the competition, because quite quickly you'll get a few established places that everyone goes to. And in terms of US stuff, the one thing that makes us work better online is we've got an insanely brilliant tech team, and the amount of investment and years of knowledge and data they've built up, it's pretty hard if you're, say, The Telegraph or an independent-ish UK newspaper group to compete with that amount of staff, technology, and 5 years' worth of data.
Quick reflection on the States. Obviously, they've got loads more money, loads more venture capital, they've got a culture of venture capital. But strangely, in some ways, a lot of American journalism, news journalism, is really quite old-fashioned. Even Fox News, in a sense, is quite old-fashioned.
Very old-fashioned, yes.
It's not terribly interactive, frankly.
I think basically it's been like this almost a leveler for everybody. There's huge opportunities for organisations that weren't there a year ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, and then there's huge opportunities for established media. And can all of them survive? I don't know. But, you can grow an audience from nothing since 2006 to 20 million a month because of sharing and because the way that people interact online. So I do think it's a hugely exciting kind of place to be in. Is the innovation going on in the UK? I think the UK is actually really interesting in terms of, yes, we might all be sitting here and kind of US owned, but actually there's a lot of interesting innovation going on. Places like The Guardian and the BBC, yes, we've made comments about them tonight, but there's huge amounts of innovation going on in the UK at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, listen, we're now getting between you and the reception, so I think we'd better sort of stop the questions here, but I guess you guys coming for a drink? Yeah, so the chance to grab them later. I'm biased. I think London actually can compete with any media journalism capital in the world at the moment. And I think these three people have really good evidence of the talent and innovation that we've got based in this city and broadcasting, as it were, to the world. So I'm really grateful for your time and those fantastic questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.